In the middle of your medical malpractice trial, the judge decides to take a break, and he calls up the attorneys to the bench and he says, "Counselors, is there any chance we can try and settle this case?" And now you begin to have settlement discussions. The defense turns to the judge and said, "Judge, we would like to offer $1 million to settle this case. We recognize that we have a problem. We think this case is worth $1 million, and now we are offering $1 million to settle the case." I now talk to you and explain to you what the defense's offer is. I tell you that the judge has recommended that you settle this case for $1 million. And you are outraged. You are furious. You're furious with the defense's offer. You're furious that the judge has also agreed and recommended that your case has a value of $1 million. Why? And I ask you why. You turn around and say, because they did all of these things wrong. How dare they do these things? This is outrageous. It's all because of their carelessness that I now suffer these problems and these injuries. And you know what I say? You're absolutely right. They did something wrong. They violated the basic standards of medical care, causing you harm and injury. But now we're past that discussion. We are already assuming that they admit that they did something wrong. So don't focus on that, which is exactly what you're trying to do. That's the only thing you've been focused on for the past 2 years as your case has come through the litigation process, through the lawsuit process. You have focused entirely on what the doctors did wrong and what the hospital staff did wrong. That's your entire mentality and that's your mindset. But now at trial, guess what? At trial, ultimately, we're trying to convince the jury that your doctor was careless and that his carelessness caused you harm, and now that your harm and injuries are significant and have a significant value. Well, guess what? For the purposes of settlement discussions, which is exactly what we've just had, the defense has already admitted and acknowledged that they have a problem, which means they recognize that there's liability in this case. They recognize that their wrongdoing caused you harm. But now the discussion has pivoted to the last part of the equation in your case, because there are 3 parts to every case. We call them liability, causation, and damages. The first part is who is actually legally responsible. The second part is whether the doctor's carelessness was a cause of your injury. That's the link between the wrongdoing and your injury. The third part is damages. What is the value of the injuries that you suffered? What are the things you can and can no longer do? And how are you disabled? And what problems do you have today? And what medical care and treatment will you need into the future? So now, once we start settlement discussions, now the entire conversation pivots to damages only. There's no more talk, there's no more discussion about who did what. There's no more talk about why he was so wrong. There's no more discussion. Why? Because it's a non-issue now. The defense acknowledges, at least privately, that they did something wrong. They acknowledge that they have to pay. The question is, how much? So you have to change your mindset the moment you start to have settlement discussions and recognize, okay, what is the real value of my injuries? And then you should be asking yourself, why do I, an injured patient, have a different perception of what my case is worth compared to the judge who sees these cases every day? Why is my perception as the injured patient with all of these injuries and disabilities so different than the defense lawyer and the insurance company who represents the doctor? How is it possible that you have such divergent views about what your injuries are really worth? You then turn to your attorney and say, what do you think my case is worth? Now, when I turn to you and say, listen, I think your case is worth $1 million, you flip out. You are totally flipped out and you are outraged. You get so upset you start yelling and screaming. You're in cahoots with the judge. You're in cahoots with the defense. And you get so irrational it becomes impossible to talk to you. And guess what? In 30 years of practice, I've had this happen 1 or 2 times where my client has become so irrational, believing in her own mind that her injuries are worth 5, 10, 20 times more than what more experienced people who have a better understanding of what the values of these cases are than she does. Why did she know better? Because her friends had told her stories about what similar cases had gone for. She had focused on other cases she had heard about in the news. And now, she thought, there's no possible way my case is only worth $1 million. The people that I read about, they had less severe injuries and they got even more money. How do you like that? So that was the baseline by which she was coming to a conclusion that her injuries were worth so much more. The defense even recognized, listen, we were not willing to pay this before trial, but now that we're in the middle of trial, we recognize all the effort and energy and resources you put into prosecuting this case. We are now willing to settle this for $1 million. And your attorney also agrees with that assessment. But you know better, and you're willing to take the risk and have a jury come to a decision. Well, I just want to share a couple things with you that if you now go that route, what could likely happen. If you turn around and decide, hey, I want to take what's behind door number 2, and I'll take that risk after I get the bug away from me. I'll take that risk. Why? Because you're still focused on liability. I'm going to show them. They're going to see that this doctor did wrong. Yeah, you'll show them that, but guess what? They don't have to agree with you. They could turn around and say, hey, listen, we don't think the doctor did anything wrong. That's a known recognized complication of this procedure. In that instance, you lose and get nothing. Or the jury could come back and say, you know what? We do think that the doctor was careless and violated the basic standard of medical care, but that did not cause your injury. And you say, that's impossible. Well, guess what? No, it's not impossible. In fact, that's something that can, in fact, happen. Now, if that happens, you lose and you get absolutely nothing. On the other hand, the jury could come back and say, you know what? We do agree with you. The doctor was careless and that his carelessness caused you harm and injury. But now it comes time for the jury to determine how much money you are to receive for all of the harms and losses and damages that you incurred. And the jury comes back with a verdict in your favor, and they give you much less than what the defense offered to settle your case. And you turn around and say, that's impossible. Well, guess what? It's not impossible. It can happen. Likewise, they could give you much more, or they could give you what your attorney is asking for, or anything in between. So the bottom line is, you don't know what a jury's going to do. And it's possible a jury will come back with a verdict that you were not expecting, and you might be disappointed. And if that occurs, there's a good chance you'll question your decision about rejecting the defense's substantial settlement offer. So why do I share this information with you? I share it with you just to give you a sense of what really happens in these medical malpractice cases here in New York. You know, I recognize you likely have questions or concerns about your own matter. Well, if your matter did happen here in New York and you're thinking about bringing a lawsuit but haven't done so yet because you still have questions that need to be answered, what I recommend you do is to pick up the phone and call me. You know I answer questions like yours every single day, and I'd love to talk to you. You can reach me at 516-487-8207 or by email at Gerry, Gerry, at Oginski-law.com. That's it for today's video. I'm Gerry Oginski. Have a fantastic day.